Welcome to Miranna's webinar, Mastering Stress, Mental Health Approaches for Professionals in High-Pressure Industries. My name is Sanna Välttilä-Witt, and I'm a mental well-being coach, positive psychology coach, and I also have a background in business, so I have over 20 years of experience in international companies, and I have also coached in a lot of high pressure tech industry companies the past 5 years. So I have kind of the experience from both sides of the coin. The objectives of this session are to understand how stress impacts brain function, performance, and well-being, and to offer some tools to start managing stress better. And just to reframe this a little bit, stress isn't always bad. It's the body's natural response to challenge or demand. The key is the intensity and duration of the stress, how much and how long you experience it. There's also something called AU stress, which is healthy, motivating stress that fuels growth and learning. And that's something that, for example, I feel now doing this presentation. There's a bit of that healthy excitement going on. So what happens if there's too little stress? That can lead to boredom and disengagement and low motivation. And so the goal isn't zero stress, but it's regulated stress. It's somewhere there in between. So to get started, we're going to be understanding stress a little bit better. So we're going to be looking at the physiological response in our body and what it does to our brain. And probably this is not new information, but it's good to always kind of go back and reflect on what's actually going on in our minds and in our bodies when we're under stress. So our body has a stress system. The HPA axis is the command center of our body stress system. So it's the hypothalamus in our brain, pituitary and adrenal axis. So when something stressful happens, there's this command line going on, like all systems go. And it's a vital system because it's connected to our survival. So in the olden days, when you were walking in the woods and then you would come across a bear, it was quite vital that instead of you starting to analyze, okay, what should I do, that this kind of automatic system went on, and you were either preparing to fight or for a flight or freeze, whatever your kind of brain thought would be the best survival of the situation. But what happens nowadays is that even a Slack notification at midnight can trigger this system. And we do get a lot of Slack notifications. We do get a lot of emails, a lot of calls, all these kind of things during our workday, and they can be perceived as threats. And then that means that our system is kind of on all the time. And that stress response, it boosts alertness, focus, and energy. And it's great in short bursts, but it's draining when it never turns off. And the normal reaction would be like you get that stress reaction, and then after a while, when the danger has gone, your body returns to the restful state again. But when we're in that chronic activation, the body is constantly in go mode, and that leads to fatigue, irritability, and difficulty to switch off. Another thing that we often talk about when we talk about stress is cortisol. And I would like to bring in that kind of the hormonal tug of war of cortisol and melatonin to your attention. So cortisol is basically your get up and go hormone. It rises in the morning and it falls at night. So when we're getting ready to wake from our sleep, the cortisol starts to rise, and when it's risen to a certain amount, then we're awake. So melatonin is then your rest and reset hormone, and it helps you to wind down and sleep. So normally when cortisol is high, melatonin is low, and when melatonin is high, cortisol is low. But when stress keeps cortisol high late into the evening, the melatonin cannot rise, and that disrupts sleeps and recovery. So early signs of this kind of hormonal imbalance is feeling wired but tired, mentally alert and physically exhausted. And stress does a lot to our brain and our attention as well. So, like already mentioned, if we have a short-term stress that sharpens our focus, like a tunnel vision or deadline, so we're kind of like just concentrating on the problem, on the threat in front of us, and shutting down everything else in our environment. But when this is like chronic, when the stress is chronically happening, the attention stays narrowed. So basically, we have these two systems in our head. It's our automatic system. It's like the habitual things, habitual thoughts, things that you do on a routine basis. And then we have this analytical system, the prefrontal cortex, which is the newest part of our brain. And that part is responsible for planning, for goal setting, for organizing, for analyzing, all these kind of things that we kind of need if we are dealing with complex issues. But when we're very stressed out, that part of our brain tends to work less. So it makes it harder to see the big picture or think creatively. So these complex problems that we're dealing at work, our brain should actually need to be very relaxed in order to kind of see the big picture and see the solutions as well, that are there. So when you start to feel that kind of stress effect on your brain, it feels like you you are reacting more, you're not prioritizing, you have a red flag, and that's a red flag for cognitive overload. So it's difficult to focus, all these kind of things. And one of the early signs of this is losing patience with small tasks or multitasking excessively. And just for the multitasking, a little bit of a memory thing is that we often, especially we women, we often praise ourselves for the ability to multitask, but actually multitasking is not that effective. And there is a small experiment I can let you do. So first of all, if you say 1, 2, 3 or ABC, you see like, okay, that goes quite fast and efficient. But when you combine these two things, so you have to say 1A, 2B, 3C, it already goes slower, and you notice that your brain has to think harder in order to do that. So multitasking is not more efficient. So the next time that you're thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna multitask today, think about this little experiment. So it would be good for us all every once in a while to do a little bit of an interactive check-in. So one of the things when we are very stressed, we don't also pay much attention. So we don't pay attention to how our body feels. We just are gonna kind of like go, go, go. I just have to do this deadline and this thing. So it's good to sometimes just to think about yourself a little bit like what's going on. So there are kind of quite a lot of early signs of chronic stress, such as aches and pains, fatigue, sleep problems, digestive issues, weakened immune system, so you have the flu all the time, other physical symptoms, irritability, anxiety and worry, low mood, difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, changes in appetite, social withdrawal, increased substance use, restlessness, other coping, um, such as retail therapy. So just take a moment and deep breath and think about, do I feel any of these symptoms? Do I feel several of them? Is it maybe possible that I'm dealing with chronic stress? And of course, these signs can have multiple origins. But if it's combined with chronic stress, that could be one indicator that you need to do something with your stress levels. So next we're going to look at some of the added stresses, especially in these high achieving organizations and women working in these high achieving organizations. So stress is not all about just the workload, but it's also about the ways that we deal with that. And one of the bigger stresses in our lives can be loneliness and perfectionism. So beyond workload, stress often comes from internal and social pressures. And one of them can be perfectionism. So there are two different types of perfectionism. There is perfectionism that you see, for example, with a fashion designer that has their perfect dress in their mind and they just don't stop at nothing of creating that perfect image that they have in their heads. But then the other type of perfectionism is the fear of mistakes. So you're not doing something because you want it to be perfect, but you're doing something because you don't want to make a mistake. And that type of perfectionism has been linked to increased burnout. So you're fearing the mistakes, that the danger signal, and that type of perfectionism feels like control, but it's actually chronic vigilance. So you're just scanning the environment and just trying to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So really trying to control everything that goes on. And the other thing that can add to the stress is that loneliness. So we people are social animals, and we grew up in tribes, and in the olden days it was very dangerous to be left behind because then uh, you were more easy target for wild animals, for example. So and that kind of still is in our brain, like that social disconnection, it's seen as a survival threat. And the loneliness also activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. So it can be a very painful experience as well. So loneliness and perfectionism are things that can add to already, if you already have a high workload and you're dealing with loneliness and or perfectionism as well, those type of things can add to your stress. So there are a couple of practical tools, and there are many tools in positive psychology that you can use to kind of enhance your mental well-being. And practical tools that I'm mentioning here is something that you can try, but if not, there are other things that you can try as well. So first of all, zooming in and zooming out. So that could work in a perfectionist situation, for example, that you kind of zoom out to 5 years from now. So 5 years from now, does it matter what happened today? Is this really a big deal? And the zooming in and zooming out, or you can just visualize yourself like, okay, looking at the situation from the distance and kind of like cooling down your emotional response a little bit. So the zooming out, however, works well with when dealing with negative emotions to kind of diminish the effect of them. And zooming in is good when you want to kind of anchor the positive emotions. So if you're experiencing something positive, then it's good to zoom in to that feeling. A second thing that you could try is a mistake budget. So you agree with yourself that this week or today I'm allowed to make 1 or 2 mistakes, and maybe you want to start small. So agree with yourself that you are allowed to make a mistake in an area that doesn't matter that much. So maybe not the most important job project, but something else. And that does two things. So first of all, it kind of anchors the thing that you're expecting to make mistakes. So it's part of the process. So it's not like that anything went terribly wrong when you made a mistake, but we're humans make mistakes. So that's just part of that. And the other one is that you can kind of start to experiment with that mistaking a little bit, because if your perfectionism is that fear of making mistakes, you can just experiment like, okay, but what happens when I make a mistake? What are the consequences? How am I feeling? How am I dealing with that? How can I what can I learn from this? So it's about a good tool to reflect as well. Another tool is self-compassion, and self-compassion is basically compassion towards ourselves. And the self-compassion has 3 different components. So first of all, mindfulness, that you're noticing that what you're feeling is uncomfortable or negative or whatever. So you're kind of not trying to numb the feelings, but just noticing like, okay, I am suffering at this moment. The second thing is second component is common humanity. So common humanity means that this is something that everybody goes through. So almost everyone has sometimes this perfectionism feelings, their fear of making mistakes. Almost everyone is at some point lonely. And these are not nice feelings. And that's human. We are all humans and we all have these moments. So there's nothing kind of, yeah. Being human is to suffer sometimes. And then kindness is the third component, and that means that instead of trying to push yourself harder or start to say like, oh, you see, I knew you were not good enough to do this, blah, 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 that kind of negative self-talk, which a lot of people have, that can come, but instead of doing that, talking to yourself kindly, like you would talk to a friend. So if your friend was going through this, you probably wouldn't beat them up, but you would offer some advice or some kind words or a hug or whatever. So self-compassion is really something that can be learned and is good to learn. And then random acts of kindness. So what happens quite often is that when we are feeling, for example, that loneliness, we're quite concentrated on our feelings, and we become a bit of hypervigilant. So we, instead of, we don't have the group to cover our back. So every new person that we meet is a potential threat because we don't know what they're going to do and we don't have the group backing us up. So what we do is we really scrutinize them, like, okay, they said that, what did they mean? They looked at me funnily, what does that mean? So we get a really kind of hypervigilant about the people around us. So in order to reverse that, you could try doing random acts of kindness. So scanning the environment, but for where can I help? Who would need my help? What could I do to make someone's day better? So it can be just simple as, opening the door, asking a colleague if they want a cup of coffee, whatever you do, smiling to someone, just kind of like doing these random acts of kindness. Another things that can add to our stress load, especially in the kind of the high pace tech environment, is these things such as ageism, invisible wall, bias, and mental health stigma. So what ageism does, it triggers self-doubt and hypervigilance and activates the stress response as well. And the invisibility wall means working hard, but yet feeling unseen or undervalued. And we kind of, and these are kind of the same, it's not the same thing, but they have like commonalities. It's about being seen and being basically that you matter, even though you're becoming older, or even though you're a woman or whatever. We all want to see that we matter and that there's value still in what we do. And our brain's reward system, the dopamine, it depends on that recognition and fairness. Like if you do a good job, you do want that people see that you're doing a good job. You want to matter to other people. And when that effort isn't acknowledged, motivation drops and the stress circuits activate. And then on top of that, there's also a lot of mental health stigma. So suppressing emotions or hiding the trouble keeps that stress system activated. So if we can talk about that, if somebody asks if are you okay, and the only thing that you can say is yeah, I'm okay, even though you're not okay, that really adds to that stress as well. So there are these kind of social constructs around us, and then we're not allowed to talk about them, or we don't want to talk about them. That kind of adds to the stress as well. So a couple of practical tools that you can do, and of course this is more of an or more this is also an organizational issue. So it's not all about the individuals, but there are some practical tools that an individual can do to start to kind of change that for them. So first of all, strengths. So getting to know your character strengths and how to use them. And there is a website via character strengths, VIA, and then character strengths. And you can do there a free character strengths test survey. And it's about 200 questions. And then at the end of those questions, you get your own character strengths profile. And you might have heard about the Strengths Finder from Gallup and all these things. Those are also strengths tests. The difference between that and VIA is that VIA is more about your character. So it's not about your skills and how good you are at work and what kind of things you can do, but it's really your character. So things like appreciation of beauty, honesty, perseverance, perception, all these kind of things. And we all have these strengths, and research has shown that if you use the top 5 strengths of your character daily at your work or at home or whatever, you are happier, you are more engaged, you are more in the flow, you are more motivated, all these kind of things. So getting to know your strengths and also think about how to use them and how to use them more and how to use them in different ways is a good exercise. Also, when you get used to that strengths and getting to know those strengths, it's also easier to start spotting them in other people. So, and that brings also another level of this. So you can start complimenting colleagues, for example, for their strengths. Like when they did something like, oh, I can really see that you used your strength in that. And people love to talk about strengths. So it really gives you, and it makes you seen. When somebody else sees you using your strength, it makes you seen. So it's like, yes, use them yourself, but also start to spot them in others. Then another tool that you can use is pits and pets. So reframing your thoughts from performance interfering to performance enhancing. And a lot of times when we have, for example, a big job project coming on, again, that kind of negative talk, that kind of like saying like, oh, the project is going on. Who do you think you are that you're going to be doing this? And are you sure that you're going to be doing this? And all these kind of things. So there's a lot of thoughts coming up that are performance interfering. They are not helping you further with the project. So, and this is something that you should do maybe a little bit beforehand. So when you're in that stressful situation, it's kind of difficult to come up with the performance enhancing thoughts. So you could do a little thought exercise beforehand. So if you know that there's a big project coming on, for example, you can sit down and start to write down, okay, what are all these performance interfering thoughts that are coming up when I'm thinking about the project? So, you know, you're too inexperienced to do this, and why do you think that you're kind of why do you think that this will work? All these kind of things, write them down. And once you've written them down, start to think about what would be the performance enhancing thought. For example, you're too inexperienced. So yes, maybe I don't have experience in this specific topic, but I have dealt with other difficult things before, and I managed to do that. And so kind of like thinking like, what are the examples that I actually can do this? So those are the performance enhancing thoughts. And then when you're in that stressful situation and those performance interfering thoughts come up, you can stop them and start to think about, okay, no, I'm not going to be thinking this because it's not going to help me further. I'm going to choose another thought. And that takes a little practice, and it takes a little mindfulness exercise as well to kind of be able to stop your thoughts and shift them. But it is something that you can learn when you practice it. And then third tool would be gratitude, giving recognition, and that also increases mental health. So there have been a lot of studies that, helping others, being grateful for others, that actually works even more in yourself than the person that you're doing that random act of kindness, of giving that gratitude. So you actually experience even more well-being than the person that receives it. So it's good to give that. And it's also, you can also turn it around. So if you are someone who is who finds it difficult to accept help or ask for help. You can also think about, like, by you asking help, you're giving someone else the possibility to help you, which then adds to their mental being. So actually, when you ask them for help, you help them. So that's something that you can keep in mind as well. So we talked about little about the physiology of the stress, what happens in our body, and we talked about some common stresses and also some tools that you can use, but it actually all starts with awareness. So an exercise that you could try for yourself is to map your stress. So you take a piece of paper and you write in the middle, write stress, and then you start to put arrows and write what are the things that you're stressed about. Work, and then you go even further. Okay, what things about work am I stressed about? And you do that for everything, and then in that way you can create more awareness. Okay, what are all the components of my stress? What am I stressed about? But also to see, like, are there things that I can do something about? Other things that I just don't have any control? Um, and then you can start to do things for those things that you have control, and try to find coping mechanisms for those that you just don't have any control over. And when we talk about that stress response and mapping your stress, we shouldn't forget resilience. So resilience is the capacity to adapt and recover from stress, challenge, or change. And stress is basically the test, and resilience is the response. And when we talk about resilience, people often say, like, bouncing back, all these kind of things. But resilience is more than just bouncing back, because sometimes bouncing back is not possible. For example, if you lose your job, then bouncing back would be to get that job back. But actually, you're not bouncing back, you're bouncing forwards. You're bouncing to something else, or you're moving to something else, you're moving to a new job. So that's something to keep in mind. And resilience is not something you have, it is something you build. So some people are from nature more resilient, but resilience is more about the techniques than about who you are as a person. So there are different techniques that you can use to have better resilience. And we all have our own resilience techniques. So some techniques work better for one than others. So there are different things. For example, when I lost a loved one, I turned to knitting. So I was knitting a lot, and that was kind of my way of gathering my inner strength and going through that grieving process, amongst other things. So mapping your resilience could also be useful. So the same thing as with mapping your stress, you write down in the middle of the paper, you write resilience, and then you start to think about, but what do I do in order to be resilient? So there can be cognitive things you can do. So for example, if you're in a problem, that you start to read everything about it and kind of try to cognitively make sense of what's happening and find strategies from that. Or you have an emotional resilience. So some people, when they, for example, if they want to work through something emotionally, they kind of tend to um, really go in deep to the emotion, and maybe listen to sad music and cry with it, or or they watch lovely holiday films on TV to kind of get into that emotion, or just kind of working with the emotions. Social is also very, very good thing to do when you want to build your resilience. So call your friends, call your mom, call your husband, whatever, just getting that social support. And then physical, of course. So, go for a run, go to the gym, do some yoga, anything that kind of works for you. And like you see, probably you are more drawn to one or the other. So mapping your resilience, writing down all kind of things that can help you to be more resilient in the face of stress. So this was a short webinar about stress and how to start to master it. And if you want to know more about it, you can always visit the Miranna app because there's lots of information there about mental well-being, about stress, about coping. And you can also always look me up if you want to have direct contact with me. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention and hopefully see you soon.